My mother called it my little blog. She'd been calling it that for 6 years, ever since I made the mistake of mentioning at Thanksgiving that I'd started writing about digital marketing online. She said it the way you might say someone's little hobby or someone's little phase, with just enough affection to disguise the dismissal. She said it again tonight, Christmas Eve, seated at the head of the dining room table in her Chanel jacket, surrounded by the family she'd carefully curated like a living room display case. My name is Rachel Wynn. I'm 36 years old. I sit at the far end of the table every holiday, next to the kitchen door where the serving staff move in and out, bumping my chair with their elbows. Nobody assigned me this seat. It just became mine, the way certain things become yours in a family, through repetition and the quiet understanding that this is where you belong. My older brother Andrew sat at my mother's right hand, where he always sat. He was 39, a senior partner at a corporate law firm in Manhattan, and the gravitational center of every family gathering. His wife, Caroline, occupied the seat to his left, wearing earrings that cost more than my car. My younger sister, Vanessa, sat across from them with her husband, Derek, both of them radiating the particular smugness of people who had just closed on a $1.8 million house in Westchester. And then there was me, the one with the little blog. "So, Rachel," my mother began, setting down her wine glass with that careful precision that meant a performance was coming. "How is the blog going? Are you still doing that?" "I am," I said, cutting into my prime rib. She turned to Uncle Henry, seated nearby. "Rachel writes about marketing on the internet," she explained, the way someone might explain that their child collects rocks. "She has followers." "I have readers," I corrected gently. "Same thing, dear." Andrew leaned back in his chair. "What is it exactly that you write about? I've never actually looked at it." "Digital marketing strategy," I said. "Content systems, audience development, monetization frameworks." He nodded with the exaggerated patience of someone humoring a child's explanation of how clouds are made. "And people pay for this." "Some do." "How much?" "Not enough to buy a house in Westchester," Vanessa said sweetly, and Derek laughed into his napkin. My mother smiled. "We're not teasing you, honey. We just worry. You're 36. You don't have a real career, no offense. You're living in that little apartment, typing away on your laptop about, what is it? Content strategy?" She waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. "I just wish you'd done something with your education." "Columbia, Rachel. You went to Columbia, and now you're playing business with a little blog?" Playing business. There it was, the phrase she'd been warming up to all evening. The table absorbed it, nodded along, and moved on to discussing Andrew's latest case and Vanessa's kitchen renovation. I took a bite of prime rib and checked my phone under the table. A message from Priya Kapoor, my chief operations officer, my real chief operations officer, at my real company, which was not a little blog. The message read, "CNN confirmed. Segment airs tonight at 8:45 p.m. Producer says it's the lead feature after the break. The correspondent is calling it the most disruptive media company of the decade. Brace yourself." I slid the phone back into my pocket and reached for the breadbasket. 8:45 p.m. was 37 minutes away. The television in the living room was tuned to CNN. It was always tuned to CNN at my mother's house because she liked to stay informed, which meant she liked to have opinions about things she'd seen a headline about. The story of what I actually built while my family thought I was playing business with a little blog starts 6 years ago in the second bedroom of a studio apartment in Bushwick, Brooklyn, with a laptop that overheated if I opened more than 4 browser tabs. I'd graduated from Columbia with a degree in communications and a minor in computer science. I'd interned at 3 advertising agencies, worked at a digital marketing startup for 2 years, and developed a theory about content-driven commerce that my boss had called interesting but impractical. When I tried to pitch it as an internal project, he laughed me out of the room. When I tried to pitch it to investors, they asked if I had any experience running a company. When I told my family about it over dinner, my mother said, "Maybe you should focus on getting a stable job first, honey." So I stopped telling people about it and started building it. The idea was simple in concept and brutally complex in execution. I'd identified that the next wave of digital commerce wouldn't be driven by traditional advertising, but by content ecosystems, networks of specialized digital publications that built trust with specific audiences and then connected those audiences directly with products and services they actually wanted. Not banner ads, not influencer sponsorships, a fundamentally different model. I called the company Meridian Digital. I built the first content property myself, writing 3 articles a day for 6 months while working a part-time job at a coffee shop to cover rent. The first property focused on sustainable home products. Within 8 months, it had 200,000 monthly readers and was generating $14,000 a month in affiliate revenue. I didn't celebrate. I reinvested everything and built a second property, then a third. Then I hired my first writer, then my first developer, then Priya, who had been running operations at a Series B startup and was looking for something that would actually change the industry. By year 2, Meridian Digital operated 7 content properties with a combined readership of 3.4 million monthly visitors and $2.8 million in annual revenue. By year 4, we had 26 properties, 18 million monthly readers, and $47 million in revenue. We developed proprietary technology that could identify purchasing intent from reading patterns with 94% accuracy. Our conversion rates were 7 times the industry average. Every major brand in consumer goods, technology, and lifestyle was either already working with us or trying to. And I ran all of it from what my family thought was a little apartment in Brooklyn. I'd moved, of course. Our headquarters occupied an entire floor of a building in Soho. I had 93 employees, a corner office with a view of the Manhattan skyline, and a personal net worth that had recently crossed $380 million following our Series C funding round, which valued Meridian Digital at $1.6 billion. But I still kept the Bushwick apartment. I went there every Sunday to write, surrounded by the same IKEA furniture I'd had since the beginning. And when my family asked where I lived, I said Bushwick, and they shook their heads with that familiar blend of pity and exasperation. The blog, as my mother called it, had made me one of the wealthiest self-made women in digital media. And not a single person eating prime rib at this table had the slightest idea. That was the way I needed it. Not because I was ashamed, because I knew my family. My mother would have turned it into her accomplishment. Andrew would have tried to be my lawyer. Vanessa would have asked for a loan for the Westchester house. Uncle Henry would have pitched me his investment ideas. And all of them, every single one, would have started treating me differently. Not because they respected me more, but because they respected the money. I didn't want their respect to be conditional on a dollar figure. I wanted them to either respect me as I was or reveal themselves for who they were. They'd been revealing themselves for 6 years straight. Dessert arrived. My mother's housekeeper, Rosa, brought out a tiramisu that nobody would properly thank her for. Uncle Henry was talking about his golf handicap. Vanessa was showing Caroline photos of her new kitchen island. Andrew was checking his phone, probably billing hours even on Christmas Eve. And my mother was watching me with that particular expression she reserved for moments when she wanted to say something she thought was helpful. "Rachel," she said, and the table quieted slightly, because when Linda Nguyen used that tone, people listened. I spoke with Margaret Chen last week. Do you remember her? Her daughter Emily works at a PR firm, very successful. She said they're hiring junior account managers. I could put in a word. I'm fine, Mom. Junior account manager, she pressed. It's entry level, but at least it's a real job, a real career, something you can build on. You can't blog forever, honey. At some point, you have to grow up. I looked at her across the table, across the years of little blog and playing business, and when are you going to do something real? She meant well. That was the most frustrating part. She genuinely believed she was helping. She genuinely could not conceive of a world in which her quiet daughter, typing on a laptop in Brooklyn, had accomplished anything worth noticing. I'll think about it, I said. 8:43 p.m. 2 minutes. My phone vibrated. Priya. Segment starting after this commercial break. Producer said the correspondent gets emotional during the interview. Apparently, your story hit her personally. I set my fork down and took a breath. 6 years of silence was about to end in the most public way possible. I hadn't orchestrated the CNN segment for this moment specifically. The timing was coincidental in the way that things that feel like destiny often are. CNN's tech correspondent had been investigating the rise of content commerce for months and had identified Meridian Digital as the industry's most significant player. She'd spent weeks trying to identify the founder, following the same dead ends every journalist hit. M. Nguyen on the corporate filings, no public profile, no conference appearances, no interviews. When she finally tracked me down through a former employee, I'd agreed to the feature on one condition. It aired on Christmas Eve. She thought I was being eccentric. I was being precise. 8:45 p.m. In the living room, CNN returned from its commercial break. The correspondent's voice was warm but serious, the kind of tone they use for stories they think matter. Tonight, we bring you the story behind one of the most remarkable companies in modern media, she began. Meridian Digital has transformed how brands connect with consumers, built a content empire spanning 26 publications with over 18 million monthly readers. But the real story isn't the company. It's the woman who built it. A woman whose own family has no idea who she really is. My sister Vanessa heard it first. She'd been scrolling Instagram on the couch adjacent to the living room, half watching CNN, when the phrase 26 publications made her look up. The company is valued at $1.6 billion, the correspondent continued. Its founder has been identified as Rachel Nguyen, a 36-year-old woman from Connecticut who started the company 6 years ago from a small apartment in Brooklyn, New York. Vanessa dropped her phone. The screen cracked on the hardwood floor, but she didn't notice. She was staring at the television where my professional headshot now filled the screen. The photo Priya had arranged, me in a blazer, standing in our Soho office, looking nothing like the woman in the simple black top sitting 20 feet away, eating tiramisu. Rachel, Vanessa said. Her voice was strange, high and tight, like air leaking from a balloon. The table went quiet. not because of Vanessa's tone, but because Andrew had looked up from his phone, followed her gaze to the living room, and gone completely still. "What?" my mother said, but Andrew raised his hand. "Mom, stop. Listen." The correspondent was interviewing a venture capitalist now. "Rachel Wynn is the real deal," he was saying. "She saw the future of digital commerce before anyone else and built the infrastructure to own it. A $1.6 billion valuation doesn't begin to capture where this company is headed." My mother turned toward the living room. She moved slowly, the way people do when they already know that what they're about to see will change everything, but their body is trying to buy time. My face filled the CNN screen. Underneath it, the chyron read, "Rachel Nguyen, founder and CEO, Meridian Digital. Company valued at $1.6 billion. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. She looked at the screen. She turned back to me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Hi, Mom," I said. The silence in the dining room was absolute. 12 people suspended in amber, forks raised, glasses mid-sip, conversations abandoned. Rosa stood in the kitchen doorway holding a coffee pot, staring at the television. On CNN, the correspondent was now giving a tour of Meridian's Soho headquarters. 93 employees visible at their desks. The technology dashboard on the main screen showing real-time reader engagement across 26 properties. My corner office with the skyline view. "This is impossible," Andrew said, and his lawyer voice was gone, replaced by something raw and exposed. "You write a blog." "I built a media company," I corrected calmly. The blog was how it started. The company is where it went. My mother found her voice. It came out as a whisper. $1.6 billion? That's the company's valuation after Series C, I said. My personal stake is roughly 62%. I let them do the math. $992 million, nearly $1 billion. My sister's $1.8 million Westchester house, Andrew's partner salary, Caroline's earrings, my mother's Chanel jacket. All of it together wouldn't cover a fraction of what I'd built while they thought I was playing business. Vanessa started laughing. Not humor exactly, more like the sound your brain makes when reality breaks apart and reassembles in a shape you don't recognize. She plays business. Vanessa repeated our mother's phrase from earlier. She plays business with her little blog. Nobody else laughed. The CNN segment continued. They were showing the revenue charts now. The growth trajectory that had made every venture capital firm in Silicon Valley desperate to invest. Then came the interview with me, recorded 3 weeks ago in my office. I saw the future of how people discover and buy things, the television version of me was saying. Traditional advertising is noise. Content commerce is a conversation. We built the technology to make that conversation profitable at scale. People called me crazy for the first 2 years. Then they called me lucky. Now they call me for meetings. My mother's eyes were glassy. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands. "Why?" she said, and the word contained 6 years of questions. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you would have made it small," I said, not intentionally, but every conversation would have been about whether it was realistic, whether I had a backup plan, whether I'd considered getting a real job just in case. You would have worried it into the ground. And I needed room to build without worry. But we're your family, Andrew said. Yes, I agreed. You're my family. The family that offered me a junior account manager position 30 minutes ago. The family that spent 6 years calling my company a little blog. The family that seated me next to the kitchen door at every dinner because my career didn't earn me a better chair. Andrew looked at my chair, at the kitchen door behind me, at the serving staff who'd been bumping my elbow all evening. Something shifted in his face, understanding maybe, or shame. Uncle Henry cleared his throat. How much did you say you were worth? That's not the point, Uncle Henry. What is the point? My mother's voice was steadier now, harder. You let us worry about you. You let me lose sleep, thinking my daughter was going to end up broke and alone, and the whole time you were sitting on $1 billion. I was sitting on a company, I corrected, a company that employs 93 people, a company that's changed how an entire industry works. The money is a byproduct. The work is the point. She shook her head. I don't understand you. I know, I said. That's been the problem. My phone rang. Not vibrated, rang. Priya's name on the screen. I answered it on speaker without thinking about the audience. It felt right. Rachel, Priya's voice filled the dining room. Segment just finished airing. Phone lines are melting. Bloomberg wants an exclusive. Wall Street Journal is running a piece tomorrow morning. 3 new Fortune 500 companies want meetings this week. Also, your Series C investors just sent over a case of Dom Perignon with a note that says, "About time the world caught up." I smiled. Tell Bloomberg after the holiday. Tell the Journal they can run what they have. And tell the investors thank you, but I prefer coffee. Done. Also, she paused, Merry Christmas, Rachel. You built something incredible. I hope your family sees that now. I looked around the dining room, 12 stunned faces, my mother gripping the table, Andrew staring at his phone like it had betrayed him, Vanessa sitting on the floor, picking up her cracked screen, Rosa in the doorway, slowly starting to smile. They're working on it, I said. I hung up. The room stayed quiet for a long time. It was my father who broke the silence. He'd been so quiet all evening, I'd almost forgotten he was there. He sat at the opposite end of the table from my mother, the way he always did, observing without participating. That was where I'd gotten it from. Rachel, he said, his voice rough, I want you to know something. I never thought you were playing at anything. I looked at him. He'd never said a cruel word about my work. He'd also never defended me when the others did. That silence had its own weight. But I should have said that sooner, he continued. I should have said it every time someone at this table made you feel small. That's on me. I nodded. It was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in years. I stood up and reached for my coat. The room shifted, tension breaking into something that might eventually become understanding. I have calls to make, I said. The world apparently wants to talk to me tonight. Rachel, wait. My mother stood too. Can we, she struggled, can we start over? Not start over, I said. Start fresh. There's a difference. Starting over means pretending the last 6 years didn't happen. Starting fresh means acknowledging they did and choosing to do better. She nodded, tears forming but not falling. Linda Nguyen didn't cry in front of people, not even family. One more thing, I said from the doorway. I looked at the table, at my chair next to the kitchen door, at the seat that had defined my place in this family's hierarchy for as long as I could remember. Next year, I sit wherever I want. Nobody argued. I walked out into the cold December air, The stars were sharp and bright above my mother's Connecticut neighborhood, the kind of stars you only see when you're far enough from the city to escape its glow. My phone buzzed continuously as I walked to my car. Texts from friends who'd seen the segment, emails from investors, LinkedIn notifications multiplying by the second. I ignored all of it, started the car, and drove toward the city, toward the apartment in Bushwick where I'd built everything from nothing, toward the desk where I'd written 3 articles a day while eating ramen and believing in something nobody else could see. The weeks that followed were a controlled explosion of attention, opportunity, and family reckoning. The Bloomberg exclusive ran 2 days after Christmas. The Wall Street Journal piece appeared on New Year's Day. By January 15th, Meridian Digital had been featured in every major business publication in the country. The story people loved wasn't the billion-dollar valuation, it was the little blog. That phrase became a phenomenon. It trended on social media. Women entrepreneurs printed it on t-shirts. A venture capital firm used it in their annual letter to investors as an example of how bias blinds people to opportunity. My mother hated it. She called me 3 times asking me to stop people from using her quote. "I can't control the internet, Mom," I told her. "That's literally my business." Andrew came to the office in January. He walked through the floor slowly, watching 93 people build something he'd dismissed for 6 years. In the conference room, he sat across from me and said 4 words I'd never heard from him before. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." "Thank you," I said. "That means something." He paused. "Can I ask you a business question? Not as your lawyer, just as your brother." "Go ahead." "How did you know this would work when everyone told you it wouldn't?" I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, the same skyline I'd stared at from a Bushwick apartment window years ago, imagining exactly this moment. "Because I didn't build it for everyone," I said. "I built it for the people who weren't being served by the old model. The readers who wanted honest recommendations. The brands who wanted real connections. The audience that every other media company was ignoring because they didn't fit the demographic profiles." He nodded slowly. "Like a family that ignores the quiet daughter because she doesn't fit the success profile." "Something like that," I said. Vanessa took the longest to come around. She'd built her entire identity around being the successful sister, the one with the house and the husband and the visible markers of achievement. Learning that the sister she'd pitied was worth 1,000 times more than her net worth shattered something fundamental in her self-image. When she finally called, 2 months after Christmas, her voice was small. "I've been jealous of you," she said, "not of the money, of the fact that you knew what you wanted and you did it without needing anyone's approval." "I didn't need approval because I wasn't going to get it," I said. "That's not the same thing." "Maybe not," she said, "but it's still something I want to learn." My mother was the hardest. She came to the office in March, dressed impeccably, maintaining her composure with the iron discipline of a woman who had never once admitted to being wrong in 62 years of life. She toured every department. She met Priya, who intimidated her slightly, which I enjoyed. She sat in my corner office and looked at the skyline and finally said the thing she'd been carrying for 3 months. "I underestimated you," she said. "Not just about the company, about who you are." "I could have told you," I said. "You wouldn't have believed me." She considered that. "No," she admitted, "I probably wouldn't have. I want to understand what you do, really understand. Not the simplified version you gave us at dinner tables, the real thing." "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me," I told her. She almost smiled. A year after the CNN broadcast, Meridian Digital's valuation had climbed to $2.4 billion. We'd expanded into international markets, launched 8 new content properties, and developed an AI recommendation engine that tripled our conversion rates. I'd been named to 3 industry power lists, delivered a keynote at the largest media conference in the world, and turned down 4 acquisition offers from companies whose names you'd recognize instantly. And every Sunday morning, I still drove to the apartment in Bushwick, sat at my IKEA desk, and wrote. Not because I had to, because that desk was where I'd proven something that no valuation or magazine cover or family apology could ever capture. That the woman they called a blogger had always been a builder. That the little blog was never little. And that the quietest person at the dinner table, the one seated next to the kitchen door, the one everyone wrote off between the prime rib and the tiramisu, might just be the most powerful person in the room. Because real power doesn't announce itself with Chanel jackets and Westchester mortgages and partner titles at law firms. Real power sits quietly, eats its dinner, and waits for the world to catch up. And when it does, it doesn't gloat. It doesn't shout. It just smiles, finishes its tiramisu, and goes back to building something extraordinary, while everyone else is still trying to understand what just happened.